Welcome, everybody. It's really, really good to have you. Hope you got your nap in this afternoon and or your coffee, if that's your thing. Afternoon coffee. I don't know, some of you might be afternoon coffee people. But we're gonna hit the ground running tonight here in just a second. I'm gonna have Gary come up and start our night. He is gonna come up and do a talk for about 30 minutes on the topic depression and the Christian. And then we're going to have another discussion moment for about 10 minutes, just to give you an overlay of the night. And then we're going to transition into about 30 minutes or so of Q&A. And so what I want to say to you right now at the beginning is some of you, from right now until the Q&A, there might be questions that are just kind of popping in your mind that you'd say, I'd love for Gary to address this particular situation or this particular question, whatever that is, related to the topic. Go to viachurch.org/Third Sundays, and on that page, you'll be able to submit a question. If you have more than one question, just refresh the page and you can submit another question there. But I'll have those on my phone, so when you see me moderating kind of the discussion, when I'm looking at my phone, I'm not checking Facebook or text messages or whatnot. I'm looking at your questions, all right? So that is for you, and yeah, the URL is right there on the bottom of these side screens. Well, welcome to our Third Sundays. These nights are just unique nights for us as a church to come together and to engage specifically around something. So we come together on these Third Sundays to talk about a topic, usually a fairly salient, relevant, important topic in light of the biblical story. So if you've been around VIA for any length of time, you know that we really heavily emphasize the Bible as a unified story, that it's not just a set of propositions, it's not just a set of wisdom tidbits or devotional tidbits or moral stories to help us live our life better or advice to help us get that next nicest job or what have you, but it's principally a story. And a unified story with a trajectory that ought to influence every aspect of our life. And so if what I said is just true, then it's important for us to talk about topics like depression in light of God's word, in light of his story, in light of what he's done through Christ. And so I'm really excited for tonight, so excited to have Gary with us. Before I invite him up front, I do want to kind of point our attention towards our third Sunday in May. So on May 20th, and many of you probably received this on your way in, here's the advertisement for it. You can grab that now. On May 20th, the topic is just simply this: the faithful worker. And we've addressed this topic before via in different ways, but we're gonna be hitting it kind of from a unique angle. Well, what is the topic? The topic is work. The dignity, the value, the God-given value of the work that we do, the vocations that we have, what Martin Luther called the stations of our life. So this could be parent, caregiver, this could be regular volunteer, this could be any number of things: construction worker, doctor, teacher, lawyer, businessman, etc. What is work? How are we to think about it? And on this night, we're going to not only talk about that, but we're going to try to break up into various segments of work to talk specifically about the work that you do. And so come out on this night to maybe be with others that are kind of in your general field. If you're in the medical industry, maybe be with other doctors, nurses. If you're in education, other teachers, other trainers, etc., to talk about the significance, the dignity of what you do, and really to seek to go, how am I to be faithful with this job, this work that God has provided for me? So mark that on your calendars, May 20th. It's going to be a really good time for us to come out and engage with that topic. All right. Well, I feel like this morning, I feel like a lot of you were here. Many of you, I just see a lot of new faces tonight. It's great to see you. It's great to have you here. And Gary, it's really good to have you with us. I'm excited to hear you speak and present to us. Gary, many years of ministry here in the East Valley, has left a significant imprint on the church in Phoenix and particularly the East Valley. So, Gary, it's so good to have you with us. Why don't you come, and would you guys welcome Gary Kinnaman tonight?
Is testing? No. Okay, great. For those of you who were not in the early service here this morning, I didn't really say too much about our family, and I just want to give you a little background. I talked in the early service. Did I talk about my injury? I tore my Achilles tendon at a Catholic retreat center, and I was walking down a lawn. It's called Mount Claret. It's by Camelback Mountain. I was walking down a lawn. It was very dark, and I thought the lawn was going to end in the sidewalk by the parking lot. I was walking to my car. Well, the lawn did not end at a sidewalk. It ended at a 2-foot wall. So I stepped off the wall, and I flew forward, did a Pete Rose headfirst slide on the asphalt. And there's a huge crucifix right there. And Jesus said nothing. And then I had a theologically correct Protestant say, well, he's not on the cross anymore. And I said, well, that even gives him less of an excuse. So anyway, my family, my wife was with me this morning, but one service with me is all she can take. And we have 3 children, and we've got 9 grandchildren. And I've been doing ministry here in Phoenix. I grew up here in Phoenix. I'm from Ohio, but I grew up here in Phoenix, and I've spent many, many years doing ministry. We started full-time ministry here in 1972, so you can do some additions and subtractions. I have some, I've got a PowerPoint, some of which I can explain thoroughly, some of which I can't. It was actually prepared a few years ago by the man who wrote the book with me on depression, Seeing in the Dark, Dr. Rich Jacobs. And Rich would be here tonight, but he has had some medical problems himself, and he's getting some treatment, and he just said, I just can't press myself. But he's a very interesting guy. He's become one of my best friends. I met him. He was and is an elder at Crossroads Church of the Nazarene, and his wife is an RN. He was a very prominent physician. He was the chief medical officer for HealthNet for a while, and his wife is an RN, and she suffered from, she was bedridden with depression. So, we're not just writing it as people who want to just talk about an interesting subject. I mean, he had a reason. He talks in the book about spiritual warfare, and then I explained my situation this morning just briefly, that I come from a family where we have a history of depression in our family. Most significantly, my mother's brother had a beautiful church in Minneapolis. We were Lutheran, Missouri Synod Lutheran, and he had to leave his church when he was in his 30s because of just serious depression. He had shock treatments, and he left the ministry when he was 37. So I'm talking about this from a personal perspective, also from a pastoral perspective. I often would have to say to my congregation, if I talk about one of these issues, please do not give me some kind of nutritional formula to cure me in the lobby, okay? Or give me a link to the magic solution to my problems. But just the idea of talking about these issues has been so helpful for people to know that it doesn't matter where you are in your walk with God or how God is using you, you're a human being and you have issues. People used to say to me at Word of Grace, I heard this often, they would come and say to me in the lobby, Pastor Gary, you're so human. And I would say, I don't know what else to be. I'm not an alien, and I don't know what this means about other pastors, if they're not human or if they're inhuman. But, so I just think it's important to talk about, the things that we struggle with. I can't remember who, I was saying something to somebody this morning about it, but how many of you have had a family fight in the car on the way to church. What the bleep, you know? So could you believe that pastors, I mean, I'm not speaking for Rick because I know he's angelic, but how many of you can believe that pastors have fights with their family on the way to church? And then we come to the house of God and we put on our Jesus smile, and I have to stand up. I've had family conflict, and I have to stand up and share God's word like it's really changed my life. We're in this together, and I think the whole issue of depression puts us in a place where we have to try to learn to understand one another. The background of the book is Rick, a publisher. I was writing for a Christian publisher, Bethany House, and I had suggested this. I said, nobody ever talks about this. And my editor, the acquisition guy, was really interested in doing it, and he said, I suggest that you write it with a medical doctor. So we did, and we got some fantastic national reviews. The book didn't sell well, but we got great reviews. And I don't know what's better. Sometimes books sell really well and they shouldn't be on the market. Some Christian books, I will not tell you which titles I have in mind. But we decided we'd write this book, and my original idea was to call it The D-Myth. How many of you have seen Mythbusters? There's a lot of myths about depression that we have to bust. People believe things because they heard it from somebody. So I'm going to try to go through some of this, and I hope I get through all of it because there's so much to talk about. I went through and I just crunched my notes, but let's look at the first slide here, okay? D-myths, okay? So when you have depression, you feel all alone, and others around you seem practically incapable or unwilling to help you. My friend on there, he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So here's a bunny with a pancake on its head. And if you ask me, what does that mean? You need to go home, okay? It's just a stupid statement, okay? So welcome to the psychiatric hotline. If you're obsessive compulsive, please press 1 repeatedly. If you are codependent, please ask somebody to press 2. If you have multiple personalities, please press 3, 4, 5, and 6. If you're paranoid delusional, we know who you are and what you want. Just stay on the line so we can trace the call. All right? If you're a schizophrenic, listen carefully, and a little voice will tell you which number to press. If you're delusional and occasionally hallucinate, please be aware that the thing you are holding on the side of your head is alive and about to bite off your ear. And if you're depressed, it doesn't matter which number you press because no one will answer. All right? So I love to talk about these things because if you haven't struggled with clinical depression, you have somebody who's close to you who has. There are 2 things that we Christians don't really know how to address well. Depression is one. Another is just illness. My son's, this is a huge family crisis for us. My oldest son, he's 44. His wife is 44. And she had a monster brain tumor removed last June. It was malignant. And, everybody has advice and counsel and Bible verses, and you feel obligated to say something. And sometimes the best thing you can do is say nothing at all. So let's look at the next slide here. These are commonly held false ideas about depression, and those who have it and how it's treated. We call these D-myths, all right? D-myths are based on a lack of understanding and knowledge about depression. D-myths hurt people with depression because they inflict guilt. It's bad enough to be depressed or sick and have someone make you feel guilty because you don't have enough faith to get out of it. It's horrible. So they inflict guilt and get in the way of a person's need to get effective help. D-myths are dispelled by knowledge, humility, and love. Okay, now let's look at the third slide. myth number one, depression is sadness or grief. Now, I talked about this morning. I think this is one of the most difficult things for us to kind of understand. It's one of the reasons, one of the most significant reasons why it's difficult for us to understand clinical depression, because at some point or other in life, we all feel down. But my co-author, Dr. Rich, he really made a strong case for this, that when we talk about discouragement or sadness, is a better word to use when you lose your job or you get a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis. Sadness or discouragement is a much better term to use for that, because it's a human emotion in response to something that's not good. Depression is not sadness or grief. People who lose a loved one, they're so depressed. And sometimes, like my mother, I think I mentioned this in one of the services, she got an antidepressant prescription to help her deal with the loss of my father. And so there are times and situations where the pain is so acute that antidepressants can actually work. We have the thing is that we have a normal range of emotions that run from anxiety at one extreme to sadness at the other extreme. And normal emotions usually have an identifiable cause. Okay? Normal grief reactions resolve. This is one of, Rich has so many medical facts and research studies in these notes, I don't even know where to begin, but I saved a couple of them. Normal grief reactions resolve in 94% of people within 13 months of the loss with no need to treat. So that's not depression, that's sadness, that's discouragement, that's pain as a result of something that happens. Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. In the world you'll have tribulation. No testing for the moment seems to be joyous but grievous. Count it all joy, but the Bible doesn't say jump up and down and just be happy when things come at you. So emotions help us adapt properly to our environment. Normal anxiety prepares us for self-defense, while normal sadness or grief makes us more reflective so that we assess our present situation in the light of the past and the future, and of course in the light of God's Word. Depression need not have readily identifiable events for it to occur. So you say, why are you so depressed? I mean, that's often the question we ask. My wife gets down. She goes up and down, and sometimes she feels troubled. We're getting older. We're not close to our children, not close to our grandchildren, and she has moments of profound sadness. And I'll say, why are you so sad? And she usually has a reason. But if you ask me why I'm depressed, why I have a heaviness and a darkness on my life, in the morning especially, I have no reason. And that just, read the book of Job. If something goes wrong in your life, there has to be a reason. The book of Job tells us that sometimes things in life simply are not explainable. Unlike sadness, depression often tends to run in families. This is an important element. This is really interesting from Rich's information. If grandparents and parents are depressed, for children, the risk of depression is 5 times the average. It runs in families. Okay, D-myth number 2. Let's look at the next one. Depression is mental illness. This is a myth. People with depression are not crazy. Unless their depression reaches psychotic proportions, they are not delusional. Like all illnesses, such as asthma, diabetes, and heart disease, depression has physical, emotional, and spiritual symptoms and signs, okay? Many medical conditions like diabetes, cancer, stroke, lupus have a much higher risk for depression than others. So there's certain diseases and illnesses that actually are can be accompanied by clinical depression. Many medical conditions, they have a higher risk. There's a seamless link. This is really interesting what Rich writes here. There's a seamless link between the physical, mental, and spiritual dimensions in people for all illnesses. We have to understand that there are, and I talked a little bit about that this morning in terms of how your brain works. There's a seamless link between the physical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions. Almost a third of the people who see their family doctor have physical symptoms like headaches, body aches, and abdominal pain that are related to emotional issues. Let's look at the next slide. There are ways to spot depression because it comes in a whole range of expressions. There's melancholy. Abraham Lincoln was known for his melancholy. I think the Apostle Paul struggled with depression. He said, "A spirit from Satan was sent to oppress me." And some people say, well, he had an eye disease. You know, I've had different kinds of physical illnesses. I had a mild heart attack. I had to have a hernia repaired. I blew out my Achilles tendon. I would never describe any of those things as a messenger sent from Satan. Okay? But I would describe depression that way. And so there's melancholy, there's a loss of joy in everything, sleep disturbance. I'm getting an annual physical now that I'm receiving, I'm on Medicare, you know, I get an annual physical, and my doctor asked me these questions. Have you lost interest in things? Are you sleeping well? Are you having, is there something interfering with your appetite? Are you not hungry? Do you feel worthless? Do you have a preoccupation with death? I say, yeah, it's not too many years away. So anyway, is there alcohol or drug abuse in the history? That those things can lead to depression. Our book has a depression test. Our book, Seeing in the Dark. And I understand that we have run very low. I didn't have a very large stock in my garage. We're going to order some more and get them to you. But it may take a few weeks because the book is out of print, and I can still get it printed by Bethany House. But when a book is out of print, they can't crank up the presses that quickly. So anyway, we have a test in the back. You know, are you depressed? And that can help people, but it's really important to see a professional. And I just want to say, surprisingly, your primary care doctor may suggest an antidepressant without really knowing a lot about depression. There's a lot of medication that's handed out because people they think they need it, and the doctor says, okay. So seeing a professional counselor may be just as helpful. My primary care doctor did not diagnose me with depression. A counselor friend did. And we were traveling together doing ministry. And I told him how dark I felt every morning when I got up. And he said, well, antidepressants can really help you. And they have. The key to understanding a lot about depression is to understand something about how our brains, and how they work. So let's look at the seventh slide. Okay, they're brain circuits. Okay, and so there we go, brain circuits. All right, the human brain is a mystery. I mean, people have studied it for years. A man in my church, Mike Behrens, for years and years and years, he served at Barrow Neurological Institute as a brain cancer researcher. And I was listening to Science Friday on NPR yesterday, and they were talking about cancer. And, you know, as much as we know, there's so many things that we don't know. And just trying to give you some simple overview of the brain. The normal brain is organized into centers of activity. One part of the brain is for movement, another is for sensation, another is for memory, another part is for speech. So if you have a brain injury, you know, not everything goes wrong, but some things do. And all these brain centers are interconnected so that we are capable of thoughts and emotions. Everything in the brain is interconnected. One brain circuit can interact with many others. Brain circuits also interact with other parts of the body to determine how you feel. I had this surgery, and they gave me a pain block, and I had opioids, which I took for like 4 days. And I never knew this, but you take a painkiller, you take pain medication, and oh man, my foot feels better. But the pain medication has nothing to do with your foot. It has to do with pain centers in your brain. So your brain is telling you that so that we take a pain medication, it just goes to that place where your brain is telling you your foot hurts. And the medication tells your brain, no, it's not. It doesn't hurt. It's okay. And the brain goes, okay, something like that. See, I'm not a neurologist, okay? So brain circuits interact with other parts of the body to determine how you feel. Now, brain connections, this is really important, okay? The basic building block of our brains, this is the next slide, number 8. The basic building block of our brains is the neuron, all right? Neurons have many connections with other brain cells. And this is important when it comes to the issue of depression, the place where one brain cell taps into another is called a synapse, okay? It's a connection point. If there are any medical people in here, please stand up and scream at me if I say something that is incorrect, all right? Or just raise the question gently when we have questions and answers, okay? So when an electrochemical message travels down the brain cell to the synapse, little packets of chemicals called neurotransmitters are released to swim across the gap between nerve cells and influence the adjacent neuron. Now, all this happens in split seconds. In depression, the neurotransmitters in certain parts of the brain become low and cause many of the symptoms, low function, and they cause many of the symptoms of depression. So let's go to the next slide, number 9. The neurotransmitter most commonly associated with depression is serotonin. How many of you have heard that word? Serotonin. Okay, so it's a natural body chemical that helps your brain function. I mentioned this in both services today. For me, a non-medical person, not educated in any of this stuff, I refer to my antidepressants as WD-40 for my synapses. Okay? So, a shortage of serotonin causes agitation, melancholy, fatigue, insomnia, and many of the other symptoms of depression. Medications that treat depression work by increasing neurotransmitter levels. Now, it's not quite like insulin for diabetes, where they can be far more targeted. It's much more of a science. The art of medication for depression is as much an art as it is a science. I talked about this in the services. My aunt suffered with Parkinson's disease, and that is a deficiency of another body chemical called dopamine. And they treat Parkinson's disease with dopamine, but sometimes they can't keep it balanced right, and the person who is being treated becomes psychotic. To me, that is it's a terrible but a fantastic way for us to understand how there's a physicality to our brains. There's a chemical composition to our brains that affects our emotions, our thoughts, our reactions to things, and we can't just write it off as a kind of a spiritual deficiency any more than we can write off a physiological deficiency, like my foot. All right, so. A shortage of serotonin, I already said this, a shortage of serotonin causes agitation, melancholy, fatigue, insomnia, and many of the other symptoms of depression. And medications are designed to treat those chemical deficiencies. Now, this leads us into some of these other myths. Myth number 4, next slide. Depression is a character flaw. Okay. You just take one look at some people and you just know that they have character flaws. All right? So, unlike many other illnesses, depression seems to have an unfavorable stigma associated with it. Depression is not from a lack of faith. Say that with me. Depression is not from a lack of faith. It's not laziness or any other kind of character flaw. Depression is an illness that has physical and emotional symptoms just like all other illnesses. And I love to use this, maybe you were not here this morning, but I love to use the I'll say it again. Is there anybody here tonight who takes insulin for diabetes? Okay. So we should tell those people, you should just have faith, and you're addicted. People say people are addicted to antidepressants. All kinds of myths, all right? And why? It's a chemical imbalance, all right? So myth number 5, next slide. There is no known vitamin deficiency that will cause major depression. And there's no known vitamin treatment that will cure or improve depression. There's Red Bliss, of course, 100% natural herbal supplement. Now, if you go to a health food store, they'll give you stuff. But there are no clinical trials that have demonstrated that particular nutrition, a nutritional diet, will in fact cure depression or prevent it. Now, there are always anecdotes. There are always people who take something and it works for them. And if you take something, I don't think there's much danger in taking certain nutrients. If it works for you, praise the Lord. I did see something. I just read an article. I'm I'm an information junkie, and I read an article. It was an article in one of the major news outlets, where a recent study has found that particular diets can actually prevent or reduce depression. That's not like eating all carrots or celery, but a good diet. You eat junk food, and you can contribute to depression and other things that are wrong with you. We all know that, right? The Surgeon General has not said we shouldn't eat Big Macs, but we know that Big Macs don't make for a long, healthy lifetime. All right, eating properly helps promote overall health, and since illness can precipitate depression in vulnerable people, it makes sense to keep a balanced diet. Exercise has been shown to both prevent depression and make it better. The main problem with exercise is that people who are depressed don't have the energy to do it. Let's look at the next myth, and I'd love to talk about this. Antidepressants are mood-altering drugs. They're addicting, or they're uppers. Happy pills. That's what people called antidepressants, happy pills. Okay. My co-author, I thought this was brilliant. He said, if they're happy pills, if they're mood-altering, you know what a mood-altering drug is, right? I've taken Xanax. It makes me feel happy and peaceful. Okay, I had a kidney stone, and whatever they were giving me wasn't working. And they said, well, we got something else that can help you. And when they gave me that, I said, where can I buy this? I mean, it was like, I thought Jesus had come back. I mean, that's what you call a mood-altering drug. Another mood-altering drug is alcohol, okay? And maybe I shouldn't say this in an Assemblies of God church, but I've had a drink occasionally, and sometimes more than occasionally, and it affects your brain, and you can feel it affecting your brain. Okay? Antidepressants are not mood-altering, and I love what my colleague, my co-author said. If they were mood-altering, there would be a street value. There are no drug cartels in Mexico pushing antidepressants. Okay? In fact, you take them and you don't even feel anything. But your wife will say, "You're a much nicer person." So, I am. I don't feel nicer. But I mean, that's really, they work. They take 2, 4, 6 weeks to work. If you had a hard day, you don't want to take an antidepressant; it'll do nothing. You want a scotch, okay? So, all right. So, however, some antidepressants, and they've found they're also not addicting generally, but I know that if I miss a couple days, I kind of start feeling restless. They're not really addicting, we could say, scientifically speaking. Taking an antidepressant medication does not make you dependent on it any more than insulin makes you dependent on insulin. The continued need for an antidepressant depends on how your depression is doing. They take 2 to 4 weeks to work. So now slide 13, D-myth number 7. Depression is not a serious illness. Okay. Did you see the joke up there? Now I know why they call it ICU. Okay. This is from a doctor friend of mine, okay? I didn't come up with this. I never would come up with something like this. This is a common myth because depression is commonly confused with sadness. Depression increases the risk of death if other medical conditions are present. That's really amazing because it's not because you have a lack of faith, but faith is a treatment for depression, okay? Depression also slows or prevents healing if other medical conditions are present, and depression can be fatal in some people. It can lead to suicide and homicide. Now myth number 8, next slide. Depression, it's a myth. Depression is a single illness. And actually, many medical conditions can present with depression. For this reason, it is a good idea to see your medical doctor to be evaluated if you're depressed. Some forms of depression alternate between extreme giddiness and energy. This form of depression is called bipolar disease. Other forms of depression arise during the winter because of the reduced brightness of the sun. This form of depression is called seasonal affective disorder. So in Arizona, we're hot, but we're less depressed than people in Seattle. Okay? Seriously, a lack of sunshine can lead to depression. Depression can happen if there are abrupt hormonal changes, such as in postpartum depression. I never had that. And nor has Tom Cruise, but he decided that Brooke Shields, some of you maybe remember this as maybe 15 years ago or more, he decided Brooke Shields, who wrote a book about postnatal depression, should just eat better and exercise. And it created a national scandal, a national conversation. And David Letterman, Tom Cruise was fired. He lost his job. He lost his contract with Paramount Pictures. And so David Letterman said, "Did you hear Tom Cruise lost his contract with Paramount Pictures, and he's really depressed." And he called Brooke Shields and asked if he could have some of her antidepressants. Now, that joke has 2 myths. The first myth is that depression is caused by something bad that happens to you. You lost your contract with Paramount Pictures. Second myth, if you take antidepressants, you'll feel better. It's not a mood, they are not mood-altering drugs. See? This, to me, this is just a classic. They're not happy pills. Okay. So, let's look at the next slide. D-myth number 9. Depression is from a lack of faith. Job and his friends, Darth Vader says, "I find your lack of faith disturbing." That's what we say to people who are depressed, right? The emperor says, "It is you who are wrong about a great many things." Some good Bible memory verses. Okay. This myth is common among Christians. It is particularly hurtful to those who have depression. In fact, depression is a grueling test of faith. And if faith were the issue in depression, everyone in the church would be healthy, and the entire unbelieving world would be depressed. A lack of faith can slow recovery from depression. Faith in the Lord is a powerful weapon in controlling our thoughts, even while we're depressed. So let's go to the next slide. D-myth number 10. Children do not get depressed. This myth partly arises from the notion that depression is caused by stress, and children are carefree. Children and adolescents with depression may be more sullen and withdrawn than adults, and changes in school, play, or personal interests may be the first sign of depression in children. and adolescents. Adolescents are also at a high risk for suicide when they're depressed because of their very impulsive behavior. Now, the last thing I want to say before we kind of turn it back over to to Josh, I think this is really important. In the human community, we have a whole range of dysfunction and disability. I mentioned in the later service today that we had a class at Word of Grace when I was pastor there called the Friendship Class, and we had about 30 to 40 families they were caring for severely handicapped, disabled, dysfunctional adult children. And when you have a disabled child, it takes more time and more energy. When you have an illness, I tore my Achilles tendon. This has profoundly affected my fullness of life capacity over the last 2 months, 3 months. There was a guy in Major League Baseball, Jim. He had one arm. Jim Abbott. He pitched for the California Angels and the New York Yankees with one arm. Now, what I like to talk about this because if you have one arm and you're going to play baseball, you have to make adjustments. Okay? You can't just say, well, you got to change the rules for me. Life goes on, and you have to make adjustments. If you have depression, I've had to make adjustments. If you have diabetes, you have to make adjustments. My son-in-law was just diagnosed. He started injections of insulin this last week, and he's depressed about that. I don't blame him. But you have to make adjustments. And that's really what life is about. You just can't be like everybody else. One of the guys on my board at Word of Grace, he became a very, very good friend, and he had been confined to a wheelchair. He was in his 60s when he passed away. He had been in a wheelchair since he was 18 years old when he was on a hayride with a church group, and he fell off the hay wagon, and the wagon rolled over him and put him in the hospital for over a year. And the adjustments that he had to make, it was remarkable. I was complaining to him about something at the church one time. We were going to a hockey game, or maybe it was a football game. He had season tickets to everything. And I was complaining about something, and I still remember the moment. He's driving a car, everything's controlling with his hands. He just kind of looks at me, and he said, "You have problems?"
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. Give Gary a hand if you would. And we're going to transition back to a time just around your tables. And what I want you to think about when we think about the significance of the biblical story, when we think about the reality that Scripture teaches that God created us out of an overflow of himself who exists in the Father, Son, the Spirit in relationship. God created us to be in relationship with one another. We know that we don't get too far in the story where we realize that our rebellion has caused a shattering in this world, that the shalom, the peace, the harmony of this world has been broken, fractured, and we live now in the aftermath of our own rebellion and our own sin, much of which seeks to isolate us from one another. And Scripture shows us that one of the powerful things about a community of faith is the reality that in Christ we have been brought together, and that we look around this room and we realize that we need each other in many ways, many different ways. We could spend a lot of time talking about the specific ways we need each other. But in kind of reflecting on this topic, at the end of Gary's book, one of the points that he makes as a pathway kind of towards healing in some regards is just the recognition of this and the value of community, of people around you, really being known, seeking to be known, seeking to understand where people are at and where they're coming from, And in light of that, in light of the biblical story, I want to set you around your tables now to have a conversation about a specific time when you needed somebody. So just think about that as it kind of relates to this topic, but maybe just even in general. This is a moment in my life when I needed somebody, a moment when I was dependent on somebody to help, to come alongside me. And go ahead, if you would, and just share that around your tables. Gary and I are going to get set up for the Q&A, but take about 5-8 minutes around your tables and just talk about the value of community and a moment when you needed somebody. All right, let's transition now to a time of Q&A with Gary, and I'll just say I've got my phone here. Quite a number of questions that are kind of pouring in, so keep the questions coming in, and we'll try to get to them. We'll probably not be able to get to all the questions tonight, but want to try to address as many as possible. So Gary, first one is this. And I'll just read it. Can
I reserve the right to say that's a dumb question? I'm not going to answer it.
Let me go to a different question then. No, this is a good one. My grandson is 18 this week. He's struggling with depression, anxiety, and anger. Is there an order of steps to take to help him? And as a grandmother, how can I best help? And you can maybe even extend that as a loved one. How do you help with folks? Maybe they're aware of it, maybe they're not. Just go ahead and comment on that.
I'm a grandparent, and my wife and I don't feel any differently about our grandchildren than we feel about our children. I mean, they belong to us in some ways. We feel they belong to us more than they belong to our children. And I mean, it's just you don't get over it, and at the same time, we feel that we have to be very cautious about what kind of advice we give to our kids about their kids and directly to their kids. I think it's important, to somehow you have to have a culture in your home that allows conversations like we've had tonight that don't intimidate or discourage the person who's trying to figure out what's wrong with them. And I think professional help is really important. I would say don't necessarily insist on a Christian counselor. Just professional help is important. My oldest granddaughter has, she's kind of a prodigy. She graduated valedictorian from her high school, and sometimes the more intelligent somebody is and the more creative they are, the more complicated they are. And she's faced some kind of serious issues. I don't want to talk about them. And as knowledgeable and as experienced as I am in life, I haven't been able to just talk to her directly, and I trust my son to do it, but he doesn't like it totally for me to talk to him directly. So these are very, I got a little proverb, and some of you maybe won't be able to figure out exactly what it means, but I like to say there's never a problem until there's a problem. And then when there's a problem, like in a family, you realize how either dysfunctional or sort of unprepared you are in the way you've created your family culture or the way you've lived your life. And so when there's someone in the family that has some severe issues, it is often a systems problem and a generational problem. And we don't always know exactly how we've contributed to that, positively or negatively. And so you should probably talk to someone, whoever asked that question. It would be really helpful for you as a grandparent to talk to someone who is knowledgeable about some of these issues.
That's good. All right, this next question almost flips the first question around. And it says this: how do you recommend parents manage their personal depression when they have young ones? I'm afraid of ruining my kids who are currently in early and mid-elementary age with my low energy and rather blue outlook on life. So you're struggling with depression, you have kids. Speak to that for a little bit.
I don't know that my depression personally ever really had an effect on my kids. I know my anger did, because that kind of goes with it. When you read about Paul, he had a demon, he had a messenger from Satan, and he also, it seems he had an anger issue if you read through the New Testament. Sometimes, you can't expect your family to be your therapists. You have to, in a sense, force yourself to be different around the people who depend on you. I went through a terrible time in my late 30s as a pastor at Word of Grace. We had a church split. It was a terrible crisis, and it almost killed me. And I always slipped little things into the message. I'm pretty honest about who I am and self-revealing. And I really felt like God told me one day, okay, you've used the pulpit for therapy long enough. I want you to preach my word and not just use your preaching to sort of satisfy your own soul. And that's very difficult. Again, if you have a personal issue in your life and you struggle with a weakness, you have to compensate for that, and then you have to believe that somehow kids will survive. I'm reluctant to say this, but I'm going to say it. The more a family stays together, the more likely the children will make it through life. And I think how you relate to your spouse, all of those things are very important. And it doesn't mean that you can never have a fight in front of your children, but my kids would say I'm complicated, I'm difficult, I'm demanding, but they speak pretty openly to me, and I've invited them to do that. I've said, you're going to have to talk to me and tell me, you have my permission. I spent my life correcting you. You have my permission to correct me. And and then you have to be able to say, I'm really sorry. These are all sort of dynamics, and the reality is, the downside of our lives affect our children. And the downside of my mother's life. My mother influenced me more than any other person in the world, but the downside of her life was traumatic for all three of us boys in the family. And somehow, sooner or later, people have to, as you get older, you have to deal with those things yourself. And as your children get older, they will have to, learn how to cope. So I don't think there's any magic, but, I think some of the things that I talked about this morning, how you process things, there's A, B, C. And to the extent that you let Jesus, whatever happens to you, to the extent that you let that come through you, through Jesus in you, to that extent, you're going to be a good husband, a good wife, a good parent, a good son or daughter. It's all the stuff inside that where we react to things and don't respond in a Christ-like way. So that's a bunch of stuff. I don't know. I should not write another book, I guess.
That's good. All right. So this next question, there's somebody here who they've just noticed things they can't explain. Things, when you talk about depression, it seems to be ringing true. At what point do they seek further help? At what point do they seek medication? What are some of those maybe signposts that you would just say, watch for this. This is the point at which you need to consult with somebody. What does that look like? What are your recommendations for someone in that
moment? Darkness, change in life, disinterest in things, despondency, all of those things. And it's just like anything else. If you think there may be something wrong with you, go see a doctor. Don't wait until it's bad enough and the doctor says, I wish I'd have seen you 6 months ago because you're toast. And if you feel that way, if you struggle with something, then process it with somebody. You mentioned relationships, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book. That, in our book, we talk about how depression is highly complex, because human life is highly complex. And there's no formula, there's no magic. You say, well, just exercise more. Well, that may be part of it, but maybe it's also maybe it's about spiritual formation, maybe it's spending time alone with God, having a spiritual director, and I think that what it was helped me survive the most difficult things in my life has been deep friendships with other people to whom I've given permission to speak into my life, to tell me not just what I want to hear, but what I need to hear. And people that are good friends, they will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And you can be grateful for that. And they won't always tell you the way you want them to tell you, and it's really easy to kind of sidestep that and say, well, if you had told it to me in a different way, with a nicer tone of your voice, I could listen. Sometimes it's just the truth is hard to share. And so I just think, someone's asking a question, how can I know? Have you ever heard your voice on a recording? How many of you are horrified? And what is so funny to me is you're the only one that hears your voice that way. Everybody else in the world hears your voice the way your voice really sounds. But you hear your voice, and we've been putting up with that squeaky, annoying voice for months, years, okay? And you hear it for the first time, and you want to, you're suicidal, so. And you can't see your own face, You have to look in a mirror, and the way we know ourselves is in relationships with one another. That's the way God made us. When God looked at Adam in the garden, and he said everything was good. God said it, and look back, everything's good. But when he saw Adam in the garden, what did God say? Look down, Adam was alone. What did God say? It's not good for man to be alone. He's happy. He's at peace with himself. But his life isn't going anywhere. He needs a woman. And and God gave him, he gave him a naked woman. Okay? So it was really sort of not fair. So okay, this is the last time I'll ever be at your church. But God said Adam needs a helpmeet, right? He said a helpmeet. What is a helpmeet? That sounds like a servant. Help me fix my meat. Where's my belt? I don't know where the car key is. And women have been relegated to that. But the word helpmeet in Hebrew is Ezar, and it actually carries with it the idea of divine strength. So God is saying, I got to make someone who can bring God to this man. And in the image of God made he them, male and female. And so God is community. It's out of the community of the Trinity that the Trinity is interdependent perfection. And so he creates a community of people that are interdependent. And so, you can hear God's voice, but the way I've heard God's voice the most clearly is when other people talk to me. And when I ask them to help me think about what I think. We talked about this morning. Help me think. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? And, if you need to tell me I'm nuts, tell me I'm nuts. Well, you're not nuts, but that thought's nuts, And it's like a mirror. Our relationships are a mirror of who we are. This is a stupid little joke, but there's a guy with a long beard that's really popular right now, and he had egg in his beard. And his friend said, "I know what you had for breakfast." And the guy said, "What?" And he said, "You had eggs." He said, "No, I had those yesterday." So, so how long do you have stuff hanging on your life and you're not going to know until somebody tells you, or all of you ladies have had this. Hey, you got lipstick on your teeth. You don't know unless somebody tells you. And even though you have lipstick on your teeth and somebody tells you, you still you halfway feel like, I wish you hadn't said anything. We just don't like to be told that anything is wrong with us. And so this is where relationships, we were talking about that, relationships, you stood up and mentioned it. Our relationships are so important. And we live in a world where relationships are being diminished. Social networking, you can defriend someone with a click, and we see this just in the world, in the political world, and all the hostility, and the fact that people don't listen to each other, and that there's one side and there's no other side, and if there's no other side, those people are not just different, there are enemies, and we can't find common ground. And Christians, I said this morning, one of the services, if Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God." So, the whole idea of relationships and how important those are. Church is not just gathering in a place and singing songs. It's really about living life together. And we need each other. So that's some of my deep thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. I didn't know that was going to steer that way, but that was good. I'm glad you took us down that trail.
Yeah.
Last question.
I got many trails in my life.
Yeah. We will see where this one goes. This is a little bit more, so pull back a little bit. This is a little bit more sociological. Do you think people are more depressed now than previous generations? What's different? Worldview, identity, these are just question marks. And is the main solution to medicate alcohol, medical marijuana, opioids, etc.? So maybe just generally, are we more depressed now than we were previously?
We are more depressed. I heard a report on the radio one time that they had found a program for severely depressed people, and that was to work on a dairy farm in Minnesota or Wisconsin for a year, just to work on a dairy farm. We live, our lives are just ridiculously artificial. I heard a pastor, a Chinese pastor, this was way back in the late 1980s, and he had come to speak. He came to the United States, and he spoke at a Youth with a Mission base. And I was teaching, but we had a public gathering, and he spoke, and he was from China, didn't speak any English. And for those of you who are old enough to know, back in the 1980s, whatever freedom China has now, it had none back in the 1980s. And he came, and I'll never forget what the first thing he said. I don't remember the rest of what he said, but the first thing he said was, "I've been in your country for 2 weeks," through an interpreter. He said, "I've been in your country for 2 weeks. And I found it's very difficult to be a Christian here." And he paused, just like I'm pausing. And he said, "You have so many distractions." I took a team to Africa. It was a big church in Africa, had a relationship with us, and they wanted us to send a team over and help them with everything from, just how to do church and children's ministry and how to organize. They were building a building for 3,000 people, and 40% of the congregation was unemployed. And if you want to meet happy people, go to Central America. Go to places where people have nothing except each other. And when I came back, I told our congregation we went over there to show them how to do church. They showed us how to do God. And we really do. We have so many distractions, and we're so spoiled, and we have so much, and we're consumers first and Christians second. You know, I used to tell my church, and I'll say this to all of you guys. All of you go to this church. There's one reason why you're at this church. Rick, you may not like this. There's one reason why you're at this church. You like it. And when you don't like it, off you go. And, just the idea of really being committed and following Jesus. And my son is in the Navy, and I saw his enlistment papers. And he signed this, and his enlistment paper said, I understand that the penalty for desertion in time of war is death. Matthew Aaron Kinnaman. And when I saw that, I thought, I'm putting that in our membership application. I mean, Jesus put it in his membership application. He said, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to die to yourself, take up your cross. Yeah. But we live in a service-oriented world, and if they're not here for me, then I'm going someplace else. So we have so many distractions, and that in turn leads to depression. I mean, it's like Rick Warren said in the first line of his book, Purpose-Driven Church, it's not about you, right? And so I do think, and so then we live in an artificial world. So then we take artificial, and Jesus said, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives, but we go and look for peace in other things. And we look for peace in, being treated right at the mall, having a good income, getting a raise, not having a job that is difficult. We have all of these things. This is an amazing little tidbit of information. I did a message one time on happiness, and I had a script from ABC News, which did a 1-hour show on happiness, and they said, when you ask people in the developing world, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? The most common answer is, I've never thought about that before. But you folks can rate everything on a scale of 1 to 10 in less than 3 seconds. Your marriage, your clothes, your car, the city you live in, your neighbors' hedges and bougainvillea, and the food, the hot dogs at Wiener Schnitzel, wherever you go, everything is like an instant scale of 1 to 10. And if it's not a 10, it's not totally satisfying. Just think about that in our culture. And with the younger generation, there are things that are contributing to they're exacerbating this with social networking and bullying and all of the just the negative things I see with tweets. People tweet at each other and they send stuff they do on Facebook. My wife doesn't like Facebook, and it makes her depressed, and she's not even on medication yet. How many of you have had experience on Facebook? And she just reads it, and so she's hearing from people that never talk to her, or somebody's doing this or they're doing that. We're taking our family to Hawaii. We just won the lottery, and so sorry if you didn't. And there's just this constant. It's a world that has created a lot, and suicide rates up among kids. Yeah. So yes, I think we live in a very difficult world. Rick, would you like to say anything about that?
Well, I'm going to have Rick come up and close us off. But Gary, sincerely, thank you so much for coming out. for sharing with us tonight and this morning on this topic.
Thank you.
We didn't cover everything that could be said about depression, but we really made some significant headway, and I really appreciate you taking us there.
Well, and
so
I'm
thanks much
I'm
for
so
that.
glad to do this. And these guys have been they've been such good friends. I've gotten to know Josh. We've spent quite a bit of time together, and Rick and I were in a covenant group together, and we've shared our lives. And it's just a real joy to be here and to be a part of what God's doing in this church. God bless you guys. You're the pastor. Feel free to comment on my comments.
I'll leave them alone till you leave, Gary. Then I'll correct all the damage later, right? Couple of things I was just thinking as we're talking, and as pastors, we're here to help you. We're here to help serve you. And it's quite often that folks will come to us for, they'll say, I need some counsel. And as pastors, I'm just going to sort of share with you, like if you came and met with me right now and said, I need some counsel, I just want to share with you like what I would maybe tell you. And this might actually save some appointments. And that, because I'm just thinking to myself, my goodness, we have probably, a lot of you might have conversations that you say, how do I press deeper into this? Where do I go from here? I have questions. As pastors, we do pastoral counsel. That means we encourage you in your faith. We help connect you to things in the church that might be good resources, or individuals in the church that might be able to help and assist you. We'll take you to the scriptures. We'll pray with you. We'll encourage you. We also will help you to connect to lifelines beyond pastoral counsel, so encouragement in the faith, because there's a difference between pastoral counsel and professional counsel. We do not have a professional counselor on staff. And so the way we handle that at VIA is we have a relationship with a counseling group here in Mesa that we, when we say, hey, we can pray with you, we can encourage you, we can connect you with some things that can help you, but here's some suggestions on professional counsel. And so when we refer to this counseling group, there's a number, I think maybe 15 to 20 at any given time, counseling associates with this group. We have relationship with them. What do I mean by that? It means that I have met with the founder and the leaders of this counseling group. Our pastoral team on a regular basis goes and just sits with them, or tours, or hears the new things they're doing, or meets some of the new counselors that are working with them. As well, with this group that I'm about ready to put their name and number on the screen, so get your pens out if you're wanting to do this. With this group, we also have relationship, and if you call there, just say, I attend VIA Church, and they recommended me to talk to you. They provide a discount for all of us that call VIA Church our home. Okay, well, how much that is, I don't know. Just you work that out with them. They do take insurances, etc. But we work with professional counseling associates, and there's the address and also the phone number. You can Google that. It comes up really quick. In fact, when I was thinking about just putting this before you and sharing it with you, I just put in Professional Counseling Associates Mesa, and it always comes up. As you call there, let me just tell you that if you're looking for professional counsel, they will ask you when you call, like, what are you dealing with? What's happening? Because sometimes you're saying, I'm dealing with a son or a daughter, or I'm dealing with marriage issues, or whatever those things are. Feel free to talk to the person that answers the phone. They will be talking to you in confidence, and they're asking you those questions to help connect you with the counseling associate that will help you best. They all have different specialties. Does that make sense? So I've never done this publicly, and they're probably going to call me this week and go, what in the world did you do at VIA? But I think it'll save some steps, because I think some of you go, I need to talk to a counselor, a professional counselor. And rather than make an appointment with one of our pastors and then have this kind of conversation, give you the information and send you out, I'm just going to sort of short circuit that. I still say that to say, as pastors, we're here, again, for pastoral counsel, to encourage you in your faith, to connect you to maybe ministries or folks in our congregation that can help you and help you navigate through that so that your church family can come around you. Okay? Good. And then One of the things I just love about tonight, and some of you might say, why are we doing this? For one, we knew this was a topic that many folks are interested in, and that sort of shows here tonight. But two, we have 5 values at VIA that speak about who we are as a congregation. And this is something that's actually objective. This has been measured through a lot of surveys and data across the board of things that are expressed at higher levels at VIA than an average congregation. There's 5 of them. We talk about them quite often in Merge 101. But one of them is authentic. Okay, and we have a statement like on our website, on our homepage, it talks about these 5 values. You can just go to viachurch.org and see these 5 values. But one of the things that we say in there is we pursue authenticity in our relationships because it is impossible to grow in your faith without it. Why are we here tonight? It's to bring these conversations to make them normal. The more Gary talks, the more we start to have language to talk to each other, don't we, right? So we start to say, hey, this is safe. I can talk about this. I can ask questions. I can ask these things and share, and suddenly it becomes more normal to talk. I'll tell you, at VIA Church, I love our Sunday morning gathering times. But how we relate to one another when we are scattered, how we relate to each other throughout the week, how we are connected with each other in relationship is what helps us to be able to move and help one another, get help, and to have victory in these areas in our life. And so let me encourage you. I know tonight we're really pushing you to the tables. Why is that? Well, we talked about needing people, didn't we? And there's been times in my life and mine and Susan's life where we have sought professional counsel and said, we are going through something and we need some outside help. We're stuck in our thoughts. We keep on going to the same spot. We don't know how to move through this and keep on loving Jesus and loving his church. Right? And so let me encourage you to have some lifelines, to have some folks to do that. I'll say this for marriages. Every time I'm ever with somebody and we talk with them and meet with them and we require professional counseling before somebody gets married, I always tell them this will help you to have some thoughts before you get married and have some conversations you need to have. But it will also be a lifeline for you down the road because I think that every married couple should have a connection with a good counselor. You might not talk to them for years, or you might need to talk to them every week. And there might be moments in your life where it's every week, and there might be moments where it's been a few years. But it helps you to continue to stay in healthy, preventative, and proactive posture in your relationships. Okay? All right, let's stand up, and I'm going to close in prayer. Gary, once again, thank you for a day invested in us. We love you and Marilyn. I know Gary's battled depression for all these years, but I always say there's very few people I laugh as much all the time when I'm with them. I'm like, I've never met such a laughing, depressed person in my entire life. And so thanks for keeping us laughing. So Father, now I pray. Yeah, it's therapy. So Father, I thank you, Lord, for being here with us. And I know as Gary was speaking, as questions were being asked, as discussions were happening around the tables, that lots of things were happening in different hearts and minds. And I know that really the success of a moment like this, an event like this, or a day like this, is what we do with this as we move out and as we go forward. And so, Lord, I pray that your Holy Spirit would guide us and lead us into authentic relationships. May we look to you. May we pass the experiences of life through Jesus and the cross and the gospel and have responses that would bring glory and honor to you. Now, Lord, keep your people this week. Bless them this week as they go. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for coming tonight.